Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. My name is Eva and today I am wrapping up the month of August and all the books I've managed to read. Couple of things: I am still recovering from a virus and I just finished antibiotics, so my voice and everything is a bit more slow than usual. I'm doing much better, but yeah, I'm still recovering a bit. Also, August, the first 20 days, I've done the majority of my reading. I was able to actually get a few days off and weekends, and so I did read 8 things in the first 20 days of August. And then life happened and things changed, and I also got sick. And so I managed to read only 1 book in the last 20 days of August, which have been quite hard. And so yeah, I'm trying to do my best, but things are gonna be quite difficult moving forward, but I'm gonna try and put up as many videos as possible. I have recorded in the first 20 days of August a couple of recommendations videos I'm gonna pop up in September, and I hope you will enjoy it. But without further ado, let's wrap up the things I've read in August, and I've managed ultimately to read 9 things. And as always, I'm going to start from the least enjoyable thing to the most enjoyable thing. Just keep in mind, as always, that enjoyment doesn't necessarily reflect the I'd say objective quality, if you can say that there is such a thing in reading and literature. But yeah, this is just how much I enjoyed the books overall, from the least enjoyable to the most. So let's start on number 9, and at number 9 I will have to put Sleep Like Death, and this came with Fairy Loot, I think, very recently, so I've managed to read this pretty quickly. It's a YA fantasy retelling of Snow White, and it's from the same author that wrote Cinderella is Dead, and also this kind of popular, I don't know if it's a trilogy or duology, The Poison Heart. So she wrote all of those other books that I did not read, and as I had not read truly neither Snow White retelling, I was quite intrigued to see how this would work out. I am not the biggest fan of Snow White in general. I was terrified as a child from the witch in the animation, Disney animation, so I just watched it once and I had nightmares for like eons after that, so never again. But I would say that this started quite strongly. In the first half I was having quite a lot of fun. It also was a retelling but very loose, and I really enjoyed how unique and the spins it took on the original. Interesting characters, it was fast-paced, and then I hit the halfway mark, and although I still enjoyed the twists on the original and I still enjoyed the villain in these throughout, I think it was quite an interesting villain, what it didn't eventually work out very well were a couple of things. First of all, the pace became too fast, and so it became cliche, and I would say typical YA cliche where things get resolved very quickly and there is no much meat to the bone. And I also would say that there is a love interest in here that in the second half hit me like in the same way that I was out reading actually these, I believe, and I was out in my garden reading these and everything was going fine, and then a seagull shot on my head and it just came out of the blue. And I would say that's the same vibe that actually the romance had in these. All of a sudden it was infinite love. All of a sudden it was like, I love you more than anything else, and there was not enough build up for that for me to believe that or to really enjoy how things moved. There were a couple of things that happened which were quite serious. Ultimately they were very much brushed off. It's not a long novel at all, so I understand that she had to probably make some choices of pace, but I always think it's a pity, because if you rush through, or even if it's a YA, you can still give a bit more depth, in my opinion, and in the second half she doesn't. Said that I am not the target audience for this, I'm way too old, and overall as a retelling I think it has some very nice, it becomes its own thing, and that it's very positive. So yeah, overall I think I gave it 3.5, 3 stars, so it wasn't like the worst. Even like my least enjoyable read, it wasn't the worst at all. Figuring out how much I was enjoying the first half, the delivery and the end was not as satisfactory as I hoped for. So next I will have to put Stand Your Ground by Roxane Gay. I was able to find these on Scribd, and at the moment I believe there is only the audio version, which she narrates herself, which is an added bonus if you ask me. And I don't know if there's gonna ever be like a printed or Kindle version of this. At the moment, audio is the way to go, and it's a very short, it's kind of a long essay that probably around an hour to max 2 hours long, and it's her views and her stand on guns and guns culture and owning a gun. And I always tell myself, because I always reached out for Roxane Gay shorter essays, that I need to pick up a full-length book by her, just because I really enjoyed everything I have listened to as of now by her. I have to say that this one, she basically looks at the process of going through, being against owning a gun, to the reasons why she ultimately decided to acquire one for herself. And though this is 8 place, please don't take this in the wrong way, I gave it full 4 stars. It was just very short, to be honest. And I really enjoy how eloquent she is in expressing her views, how much research she put in, and how much of her research she shares with us. The way she expresses her views is always insightful, and also it really hits you in the chest, because it's right at the center of contemporary topics that we all hear about in the media and everywhere pretty much. So it's always, for me, like a way to discover more about very relevant topics, currently ongoing topics. And I also think that the way she can narrate her human experience of these current topics is always something that, in a sense, I can relate to certain degrees. Of course, I don't live in USA, I don't own a gun, but ultimately what I took away from this is, if you have a better solution, I'm here to hear it. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be anything better than making sure that I feel safe. And one can argue against or pro this view, but the way she puts it down, the way she kind of leads you to her, process of thinking and guides you through why she arrived to the conclusion that she did, it made a lot of sense. So again, you don't have to necessarily approve her choice to understand why she had made that choice. And I think that's all I ask when I read a non-fiction is, whatever choice you've made, let me, guide me through what led you there, what is the process that led you there, and she does. And so I found this short essay very insightful, and I would definitely strongly suggest it. And I love also like the title, how empowering the title feels, in a sense, as a woman, stand your ground, or someone who's like, viewed possibly as like a weaker compared to others. And so it's important that you do stand your ground. So yeah, overall, I would definitely suggest it. I don't know where you can access this. I don't know if it's an exclusive for Everard, which was the old Scribd. It might be, so you might have to look up where to find this if you don't have Everard or Scribd. And then another gift by Everard that just popped on my screen when I was on a train, and this is for A Fig of Devils. I don't know if this is self-published potentially, or how the author went about that, but I was able to access it for free for Scribd, and I love the cover, and so I decided to just give it a go, and I'm so happy that I did, because I found this being a small gem overall. This is the story of Death looking for a replacement. Death has to kind of spend around 1,000 years serving as Death, and then if he finds a replacement, he can finally be at peace. So now the 1,000 years have gone by, and he needs to find a replacement. I'm gonna keep it very vague, but that's the gist of it. You follow Death and its potential replacement through the journey of meeting and deciding if this replacement is gonna actually replace him or not. And I found the prose of the author exquisite. I really loved his prose, and I also liked how this book explores grief, and grief is in the pages, it comes out of the pages. And so the topics that are discussed in these really hit me hard. And I also thought that grief is not an easy emotion to express, and he did it very well. I also liked how this is considered potentially horror, and at times in short scenes, and not very often, but they are sprinkled throughout the novel. This is very horrific, like very violent things happen on page. So just be aware of that. It's not the most disturbing things I've ever read, but it definitely made me think like, oh wow, this is happening, and he's describing it. And I must say a couple of things that I ultimately led me to put these quite high up in the enjoyment, on the side of, you know, things I've enjoyed slightly the less, if you want, is just because of how short I found it. I found that for the content that this book was exploring, it should have taken more time to do so. And in a sense, though, it's also a praise. I just wanted more. I also think that the character of Death could have been explored a bit more. It was such a character that had gone through such horrific suffering, that we glimpse some of it, but not enough, in my opinion. It could have been nuanced more. And the end, it was surprisingly uplifting, but it wasn't fitting the narrative, if it makes sense. I was not expecting uplifting from a novel like this, and I don't know what that says about me, that I don't like a more uplifting end, but in a sense, like, there was like a vibe that it was not matched, in my opinion, in the end. So I gave this full 4 stars. I will definitely get my hands on a copy of this if I can, because I think, especially if you're like on maybe a younger audience but you want to explore horror and grief, this is a very good novel to start with. I love the cover, so I'd like to own a copy, and I will check out more by this author for sure if I ever, you know, find out something else by him. And it was like a very nice experience, although it didn't deliver completely fully. It wasn't my best thing of the month that I read. I'm still very happy that I did find this, because thank you, script, I wouldn't have otherwise. Okay. Next, I will put The Darkness Between Us, The Darkness Within Us. This is the Fairy Loot edition, and I just reversed the dust jacket just because I preferred this much more. This is odd for Fairy Loot because, technically speaking, this is the second book in a series, and Fairy Loot usually does not send you out like second books in series, but I think because it could be considered like a standalone, a companion, then they thought it was okay. I think the first book in this duology is The Shadow Between Us, which I would suggest to read first, because to be honest, I felt like I was missing out because I'd not read that one before. So I'm gonna try and be a bit vague about the synopsis, but basically follow the sister of the protagonist of The Darkness Between Us, and she's married to this douche of a duke, and is very old and frail and is about to die. And she is about to inherit all his money if only he hurries up and die. And when finally she does manage to get hands on the money, someone else comes in and just say, well, actually, I'm the heir of his money. This is all mine. And so she has to go on a battle to get her money back, to, you know, not allow someone else to get her inheritance for this marriage. And I initially truly fell in love with this. I loved how impertinent, determined, relentless Chrysantha, I believe that's how she's called, was in pursuing what she wanted and making life hell for those who she believed had wronged her. And I had a couple of genuine laughs at the beginning. I absolutely adored how she stood up for herself in a way that's very petty at times. This is not a book about good, lovable people doing what's right. This is quite exactly the opposite. And once I got the gist of it, and I was on board, I was like, okay, this is quite refreshing actually. These are not morally grey characters. They're trying to do what's best, but going about it in a sideways method. They're actually very morally grey characters. They are doing what they want to gain for themselves. And for a YA, I found that quite unique as a concept. So yeah, I absolutely adored the first half of these, and I generally had a lot of fun. The latter half, I think the enchantment kind of ran off a bit, and the YA element comes into play in these, in the sense that very serious things happen, like murder, for example, which is very much brushed upon to the point that at times resents the absurd of how much things are not even delved into. She's also kind of like, I'm the most beautiful, everybody thinks I'm the most beautiful, so there is that in here, which at the beginning I don't care much, but when it keeps coming back in the pages, it becomes a bit like, yeah, okay, just, you know, it's just, yeah, get over yourself, girl. I get it, you're beautiful. So ultimately, I think the latter half didn't manage to kind of breach the wall and hit me as I wish it had. It was fine. I still wanna reach out for the first book. I thought it was gonna probably be a lot of fun as this was, and I'm gonna keep this book just because I thought, you know, it's just fun. It's just a fun, quick read. But yeah, curious to read more by this author, and to be fair, I did appreciate her take of, let me just tell you about this vain girl who just is not gonna take a no for an answer. And yeah, it could be considered very refreshing in the genre. We don't often get to read about someone who's just selfish, in a sense. I have to put the only book I've managed to read in the last couple of weeks of August, 10 days of August, which is in Italian, it's a Storia della bambina perduta, but I think in English is Story of a Lost Girl or something like this. I'm gonna pop it here. So this is the Quartet by Elena Ferrante. It's translated, 100% sure, because I actually found out about these books from an American booktuber, and then I went to Italy and picked up the whole series, because if I can read it in the original language, why not? So this is a 4-book saga, and you follow 2 women from their childhood up until they're 60. You have a point of view, so it's written in first person from Elena's perspective, and Elena tells you about her own story, but also the story of her own best friend, Lila. And the first book is their childhood, teenagehood in the second book, early adulthood in the third book, and then here you start when they're in their 30s up to when they are 60s. And these 2 girls, they grew up, they were born in Naples, in Rione, which is like a deprived area of Naples at the time. When they're born, I think they're born in the 60s or something, I might be wrong, but I think around the 60s. So it tells you their story about growing up in this area of Naples, and them and their friends and family and what happened to them. So you kind of follow the life of these 2 women through the Rione and their friendship, and eventually moving out, or whether it's the case. And for me, these books have a very powerful impact on me. Now, I did not grow up in Naples, I grew up in the north of Italy, but these books taste like Italy in a way that no other book ever did, even other books I read in Italian. She has a style of writing which I don't think is necessarily for everyone, but in a sense, the way she tells her story, it's just so impactful for me, and it hits me where it hurts the most, which is my memories. Somehow I lived through this story, and if you have read this is it's a literature fiction that is full of actually tough moments, and it's not about necessarily making it in life. It's about, you know, the struggles and life that's at most chaotic. And also you follow these 2 women that are not very likable. They make a lot of choices that are very questionable, and throughout their life they do not learn many lessons, and they hurt each other, they hurt other people, and they don't have the insight a lot of the times to realize what they're doing. Not always, but overall they do not make amends by the end, if it makes sense. So they are unapologetically selfish, both of them, to a certain extent, throughout these novels. And it's a hard read for me, because I have a weird attachment to this story. In this book particularly, there are a lot of twists that I did not see coming, and I don't think these are perfect novels. I loved book number 1 and 2. Book number 3 I didn't love particularly. This one I liked more than book number 3. However, there is that frustrating element that comes in, because this leaves things open on many sides, and it doesn't feel like an open-ended that make me, oh, I wonder what happened. I felt quite frustrating, because I felt like I've spent a whole life with you guys and I want to know now, and I will never know. So the way things are left in a sense, was quite frustrating for me. It's also frustrating following people repeating or following patterns throughout their life that are ultimately self-destructive. And it was quite hard in that sense. Said that, is this not realistic? Is this not real life? Does everybody has an arc in life where they start off and make mistakes and then they make amends? Unfortunately, no, that's not how it works. So I do have a lot of respect, because I think this is quite a true novel of a human experience. And yeah, I will cherish these novels with all their contradictions. It's a bag of mixed feelings. I'm gonna carry on with me. I will read more about her. I do have a suspect that this is actually way more autobiographical than we think it is. There is no information whatsoever on that. It says it's not, but I do have a question mark in my mind of how much of this can just be made up, if it makes sense. It feels very, very real. But yeah, very tragic, but very powerful story with a unique writing style. And would I suggest this if you're into literature or fiction? 100%. Give it a try. The first two books were like mind-blowing in my opinion, and yeah, I overall enjoyed the whole saga. But especially if you're Italian, I think this will call you home in a sense, even if you're not necessarily on that area of Italy. And if you're not Italian, I think this captures quite well some of the atmosphere, some of the, living in Italy, where it's not like, the fancy parts that you see in the TV show or like in movies. This is like the everyday Italian life for so many people, especially a few decades ago. It captures it very, very well, so it can give you that kind of it's a window inside the life that you might not be able to live otherwise if not by reading through this. Next, I would put In the Name of a Children. This is a true crime autobiography that I found on Scribd, and it's from an FBI agent that dedicated his professional life to solve crimes against children. And in this biography, he touches upon how he came to join the FBI, and he touched upon a few cases that he resolved. I don't know if he chose the most famous cases or the ones that probably left a mark on him the most. I want to believe that's the case. For sure he didn't go through all his cases, but a few of them. And this is one of the hardest books I had to ever read, especially when it comes down to true crime, just because it says in the title, it's about child abuse, child murder cases. And so he will not spare you details, and having to go through some of those scenes, having to just listen to some of those details, I will never forget those things, and I can only imagine what kind of demons this man has to live with. So I would say I wouldn't suggest this to anyone. I read horror and I like to hunt for the most disturbing horror I could ever read, and then I read something like this and it impacts me way more than any disturbing horror I might have read, just because this was all real. And it will hunt me down. So take this however you want. I don't know, if you're very much into true crime and you think like you can put up with it, give it a try and see. But it's definitely a very, very hard read. A moment I had to stop the audiobook and just say, okay, big breath, maybe let's start in a few days, continue on in a few days, because this is very intense. So it was a hard read. I found though that he dedicates quite a lot of time describing himself, his family, the impact that this has on his family, and I didn't mind that because it made him look human. He's a human doing this job, and so I appreciated that he put a lot of himself in this book. But again, if you just want an anthology of crimes he resolved, that's not the case. It's more like a biography, if you want, in the style that's done. I also personally have had some issues, if you want, or I found him having a conversation with certain killers that had done some of the most atrocious crimes ever, very compassionate, which I struggled to relate with. It was like, whoa, how can you be so kind with this monster? But it's a very personal take, and I know that probably was too invested, and I know that he was actually professional in what he did. So I had a bit of those reactions, which made me think that actually this book was very well written. It was very honest and genuine, and it's a book that provided me with an experience not only of the cases itself, but also how a human has to go through these and resolve these, and how he approached it. And I found him very humble at times, and I found him very caring for the families of the victims. So his love for his job and how much has impacted him really came through, and I gave it like almost full 5 stars. It's definitely a book that I will get in my collection of true crime, because I think it's a very, very good true crime. It's one of those though that are the most hard to go and read through. Personally, maybe because I'm a parent myself, I don't know, I just found it extremely disturbing. But there are people out there that do this job. There are people out there that are trying their best to keep the kids safe, or, you know, bring justice home, and we don't hear about them very often. So for me, this was an occasion to learn about, you know, people that actually do this job. But yeah, moving on. It's even difficult to speak about this book, because it's difficult to find the right words to describe something that's so insightful but so atrocious to have to read about at the same time. Okay, on the third place, I'm gonna put a book that's way more light, but I had a lot of fun, and this is one I kind of want to remind of when, you know, enjoyment doesn't reflect quality. But at number 3, I will put Murder Road. Said that I did really enjoy this. I think for a fiction horror thriller book, this is a very high quality one. Don't take this the wrong way, but you know, when you compare such different things, it's hard not to feel self-judging myself, or like, you know, where I put stuff. But this was a lot of fun. This is Murder Road by Simone St. James, and this is the Evernight version. I did an unboxing for these, and it's just stunning. I had never read any other books by this author, and so it was my first St. James. And this is the story of these 2 newly married couple. They're traveling to their honeymoon, and they are on this kind of abandoned road in this sort of forest, and they stumble upon a woman who has been deadly injured. So they pick her up, try to get her to the nearest A&E department to try and save her life, but she doesn't make it, and all of a sudden they found themselves in the middle of a murder inquiry. I read these voraciously. I just couldn't put it down. I enjoyed how fast-paced it was. I enjoyed that we had a kick-ass main character. I had a couple of laughs, and for a story that's not too long, she managed to get me attached to these characters quite quickly, to the point that I was very much interested in their fate. And no, I don't think this is particularly spooky. I think the atmosphere is the most spooky things of this book. There are not necessarily like major horror or horrific moments, but I enjoyed the twists. Things I didn't see coming popped out of the pages all of a sudden. I enjoyed the ending. It was overall a very, very satisfactory experience, and it pushed me to immediately put in the cart another book by her. I think she wrote down The Sundown Motel or something, which is even more famous than these. So yes, The Sundown Motel, I think I found this as being the most famous by her, and I like her writing style. It's a thriller that does what it promises, and that's sometimes all I need, is just like a simple, if you want, simple thriller with likable, interesting characters and interesting twists. So yeah, Murder Road, I would personally suggest it. Number 2, I will have to put Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. This is book number 2 in the Emily Wilde's series. I don't know how many books are gonna be in there. This is the Fairytale edition. First one, you follow Emily. She is a triologist. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, but basically she researches fairies that are real in this world. So she travels around, and in the first book she's trying to put together an encyclopedia of fairies. So she travels to this remote in the north somewhere area to try and research the local fairy and creatures, and she's followed around by her colleague Wendell, who is aiming to make her life miserable and potentially steal her information that she's afraid of. But it's it's what it says in the title. You follow Emily and a bunch of colleagues and friends and whatnot going around the world to research magical creatures. And this book is no different. Now the stakes are a bit higher in here because someone is very much at risk, and so they need to find a cure as fast as possible. They need to find answers, so they travel to another area. And also the cast of characters does expand a bit in these. It's not just Emily and Wendell anymore. You got a couple more characters joining their research project. And I loved these. I really enjoyed these even more than the first one. And the first one I already had a lot of good times with. I loved how these characters have unique personalities that really complement each other. I loved how at any point I wasn't bored, and even if at times we just go through, I don't know, an excursion and we are just told about the scenery or the kind of folk, you know, fairy folk that they find and their characteristics, I always find it enthralling and interesting, and I'm just there to learn more. So the way these keeps me glued to the pages for me is like an added bonus. I really appreciate this book for it. I found that a couple of times we rush through a couple of things, but I can't hold a grudge because overall the pace, the characters, what happens in these, I really truly enjoyed from start to finish. I also love how Wendell is a unique love interest. He's got so many quirks and unique traits, and at the same time he can all of a sudden be so kick-ass without batting his eyes. Second before he's like, no, we need to fix this, and you know, things that need to be in order, and then the second after he's cutting people's heads off, but with nonchalance. I love how he's written. His character, I think, is beautiful. This love story that it's interwoven within the story, and it does not take the precedence. It really takes, you know, leaves characters their space. It's lovable. It's just enchanting, and I cannot wait to continue on. And yeah, I had to give this 5 stars because when I stopped and think, yeah, there are a couple of answers there or a couple of things I wished we had spent a bit more time on, but really in the big scheme of things, my enjoyment of this was a 5 stars. So here we go, 5 stars, will continue on. And I would definitely strongly suggest this series if you like whimsical fantasy with a bit more like meat to it, because there is action in it and it's not too whimsical, but it's always magical. And at number one I put a book that it's not 5 stars. So the last 2 books, I tend to rate books for what they promise. So the last 2 books I've mentioned, number 3 and 2, they said this is what we are, and they provided that perfectly. Now number 1, I give it 4.5 stars because compared to another book in this saga, I liked it slightly less. However, that it had an impact on me that it's gonna be way stronger. So don't take this in the wrong way, if it makes sense. On Goodreads, it's a 5 stars. But I wanted to distinguish it from the other book that I overall enjoyed it a bit more, but while acknowledging that this had such an impact on me that it deserved number 1 spot. And this won't come as a surprise to anybody because you know I've been reading this series, but this is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first in a quartet of standalones, companions that stand between the first trilogy and the next series. So you got the first trilogy, and the last book is The Last Argument of Kings, which I gave it 5 stars, and then you got these 4 standalones, and then you got the other series. On Goodreads you can find all of this information, or on Wikipedia. In this one, because it's a standalone, I would say I can describe it vaguely, the synopsis, which is you follow Monza. Monza, she was at the peak of her life. She was at the peak of everything, being loved by the people and being a very successful captain of this band of mercenaries, and then all of a sudden everything is taken away from her, and so she decides to go on a path of revenge. And someone described it as Kill Bill, where you got a list of people that she has to execute a revenge against, and that's true. So she will find a bunch of people to help her out in this mission of revenge. And while this never felt like Kill Bill, to be fair, in its premises, I understand why someone would describe it as that. First of all, I tapped the hell out of this. I love his writing style. Experiencing his writing, it's what I mostly go into his books for. I love his writing. It's unique. And as many of us do. I do have a question though. I wonder how, if these morally grey characters were not in a fictional book but were in our prisons, how much we would love them as much as we love them in his books, because everyone loves his morally grey characters to pieces. But if you really think about these people doing these things in real life, we would ostracize them, we would not accept them, most likely. So I just had this reflection of how these morally grey characters are good only in fiction, and they should stay only in fiction. Despite me not loving these as much as I loved The Last Argument of Kings, I loved these in its own unique way, almost in a reluctant way, if you want. I had a lot of feelings going into these, and I preferred, for example, a lot of the secondary characters compared to Monza and Shivers. And again, upon reflection, perhaps I appreciated the secondary characters more, so more of like the band rather than Monza herself and Shivers, because we spend less time in their head. So I could make up more justifications for what they were doing rather than with Monza and Shivers, because we get so much insight in their way of thinking that there was a point where I couldn't justify them anymore. There was a point where I was like, that's just shitty, that's just bad, and there is no way I can just say, oh, but I love you anyway. So having less time in the head of the secondary characters allowed me to put up with more with their bad actions, if you want. Because ultimately, yes, I think that there are points in this book where our characters, especially Monza, she made the realizations, and she acted in a way that what happened to her didn't justify. The end didn't justify the means, basically, and there's no way I could just say, I love you anyway. So I never clicked with Monza completely, and I also found that there is one of the revenge bits in these, the plan that they came up with and that the other people fell for was a bit silly. It was like, this is too convenient. You just can't have these men walking in camp and just say, oh yeah, I changed my mind. Oh yeah, he changed his mind, let's follow him. That's just silly. So that's the only point where I was like, this Abercrombie, I don't think this was planned exactly correctly. I can go into be more details in the comments. I don't want to spoil anything. I also had some issue with Shiver's story arc. At one point I just said, well, that's just, your job, what you do. Maybe you couldn't put up with his story arc because it really triggers you. However, upon reflection, his story arc, the way he ends up and the things he ends up doing are shitty on every level, to be fair. I don't think it's because of my background that I don't tolerate that. I found that what happens to him, it's unfortunately realistic. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that it was so freaking awful having to witness someone going down that dark path. They were already on a dark path, but he goes downhill head first, and what he does is absolutely horrific, and the resolution to that I didn't particularly love. I think he got more than what he deserved, and that was frustrating in itself. However, ultimately, if you think about this book, you follow unlikable characters, morally grey characters that, to be honest, they're not even very much morally grey. They are bad people doing bad things, at times for bad motives. And the way this man, Abercrombie, manages somehow to still make us feel for the journey and for the story, it is unique. It's a unique experience. The fact that you keep cheering for some of them, at least, it's unbelievable. But it's true. It happened to me as well. And it's the idea of having a redemption arc that does not go as usually redemption arcs go. And so in its uniqueness, I can't not recognize how out of the ordinary this saga, his writing, his characters and his stories are. So yeah, first place, Best Served Cold. I need to get my hands on The Heroes. I think it's the next, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, but I think the next one of the standalones is The Heroes, which I do own in Italian, but I don't want to read in Italian. I don't want to read the translated work when I can read the original. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for putting up with me and my slower voice and everything. I hope next video will be a bit more uplifted and feeling a bit better. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe and join the small community. I'll see you next time. I would love to chat with you in the comments down below. So please don't be a stranger. Come and say hi, and I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Ciao!